local variable called control state as an object, and we're going to set that equal to this inbound saved state parameter, which is the state information. And we want to change that to an object, so we'll do a C type, and we'll take the saved state and convert it to an object. And then the next thing we want to do is, in the base class, load the control state. So rather than passing the saved state, what we want to pass here is the first element of our object array that contains the base class state information. And then what we need to do is, to our customer ID value, what we want to assign is the control state, the second element of the array, and that needs to be an integer. So let's convert that to an integer. So that should load the control state information into the user control. So we look to be all set here in terms of implementing the save and load control state functionality. Let's open up our default ASPX, and what we want to do here in order to test this out is we're going to take our user control, the sample control, drag and drop it onto the web page, and there we have our user control. Now we need to add a couple more elements here to test this out, and the first one that I want to add is a label. And what we're going to do with this label is simply assign the value of the customer ID so that we can have an indicator that the user control is properly saving and restoring the control state. And let me go back up to the design service, because there's one more thing that we want to put on here, and that is a button, so that we can use that button to post back or cause the page to post back. So that looks good for the default ASPX page. Let's go to the code behind, and what we want to do in here is when the page loads, we want to get the value of the customer ID and put it into that label control so we can see what the value is. So we'll do that in the load event. So let me add an event handler for load. And then what we're going to do here in the load event, actually two different things. And the first one is that we're going to take the label1.text, and to that we're going to assign to it the sample control 1.customer ID. Now we haven't compiled this yet, so we don't see customer ID property from the user controls, but I'm going to type it in because we know it's there. And then the next thing that we want to do is increment the customer ID. Let me just compile this so we get rid of that error. And the next thing we want to do is take the sample control customer ID, and we just want to increment it. So we'll just say plus equals 1. So what this will do is whenever the page loads, it's going to display the value of the customer ID in our label, and then it will increment it, storing it to the user control. And the user control, if this works according to plan, will save the incremented value in the control so that the next time we come into the page, it should load that incremented value. So the page should show us 0, 1, 2, etc. So before we test this out, let's go over into the sample code user control, and let's just put 2 breakpoints, one here in the save control state and one in the load control state. So let's start up the website, and we'll get our sample page, and the initial value should be 0, and actually here we come into save control state the first time the page is loaded. We'll just let that run. Here's our page with 0, which is the first value of our customer ID, since we by default didn't assign anything to it. So we'll post the page back by clicking our button. And let's hop over to Visual Studio. Here it has hit the breakpoint in load control state as the page is being loaded. And if we step down through here, the first thing it does is load the base class control state, and then it's going to load our customer ID. And let's just hover over customer ID, and as you can see, its value is 1, which is the incremented value that we stored in the load event for the page. So we'll let it run from here, and here we are coming into save control state, and it's going to store the incremented value, which in this case should be 2. So let it go through, and customer ID indeed is 2, so it's going to store that into the control state. We'll let it run from here, and you can see that the value is now 1 on the page when it was 0 previously. And if we continued to post the page, we would see this increment to 2, 3, and so on. So we've seen here how to implement the saving and restoring of a control state, and in this particular example we're storing a single value, in this case the customer ID, and you can store anything in the control state because it saves and restores an object. And one additional approach that you could take when you get this sample and start to implement it in your own code is, rather than storing a single value such as customer ID, you could create a separate class. Let's say we created a customer class that had multiple properties to it, and then we could store that in an instance of that customer class in the control state, which would provide us with a lot of flexibility to store multiple values. So I encourage you to download the source code that comes with this video, take a look at this sample, and then extend it from there to meet the needs of your particular situation. This is Chris Pelz. Thanks for watching this video on how to implement control state in an ASP.NET user control.